something. So Greg, can you take us back to our last time together?
All right, I'll try not to be too fictional, but my recollection, and as noted in the notes, I think we're trying to take the title of the website seriously and literally, of literally create a people's constitution 6 years from now is our goal by whatever 6 years is from now, 2028. The thinking is that we, can have a lot of plans about doing individual activities, and many of those can be good, but they are just those individual activities without a context, without an overall strategic plan. And we know our friends on the other side always think strategically, which means they're thinking multi-years out. And while it's awfully difficult for us to think in those terms generally, with so much horror occurring each and every day, nevertheless, this is the perfect kind of project that lends itself to take a step back and think about what can we conceivably do. And if we have the more than ambitious goal of creating a people's constitution, then let's give ourselves a time. And 6 years out from now is 2028. The reason for that date being chosen is that will be the presidential election after this next one. And as all indications seem to be, we are headed toward a much more severe monocracy, plutocracy, corpocracy, autocracy, all rolled into one plus more horror as time goes on, given the multiple crises we are facing. And so there is going to be opportunities, even more than what have presented themselves with up to this point, in which individuals are going to be looking beyond what can be done to just simply change faces or change statutes or change regulations to change the system. And systemic change, pretty decent place to start with, is our basic overall governing document. So that's the rationale for why we've chosen that period of time. And so our thinking was, and goal for this meeting was to try to develop to try to develop a list of elements that would go into such a strategic plan. For what it was worth, if you scroll down to the very end of the agenda or of the notes, I developed some kind of at least very rough document to think through and to start with in developing such a plan that has both an internal and external component or components to it that we can work from or completely ignore and start with something else. But I'll stop there, pass.
Thanks, Greg. So reactions to Greg's homework that he did? Thoughts? So,
and I could go into it more if people are interested.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who that was. Margaret?
Yeah. So I just took a quick look at the notes. So it looks like the plan that we would be going over today is an organizing plan. So not the elements of the ultimate product, the proposed constitution, but an organizing plan, right?
Yes, well,
that's right.
Yeah. So this would be the process to develop the strategic plan that will include the actions that we'll do between now and 2028.
Jessica Stack?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you, Greg, for that. And Margaret, I think, raises a really good point or question to just get clear on, which is from my perspective, the point of this project is to try to like foment insurrection in terms of thinking about new constitution and raising questions and thinking about the organizing that goes into building it, and not so much that we're going to be the ones to write it, because it should be a popular process and et cetera. We all know of this, but I think it would be good for us to like get clear in our talking point and thinking early on about that difference. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly something to be clarified during the strategic planning process is, how do we see this happening? You know, people's movement assemblies, that kind of thing. I thought there was another hand, but I must have been wrong.
We also have Millie check in. They just joined.
Oh, yeah, that was it. The 707 person, can you say hello? Check in with us? It might not be convenient at the moment for
Yeah.
Millie
That's fine.
to say yes, but whenever they're ready, Millie, oh, go ahead.
Okay, am I unmuted now? It made me do a second.
You are.
Can you hear me? Oh, hey, yeah, I figured it out. I don't need to take a long time. Sorry, I am late. Just going through a lot with the move and everything else. But I'm happy to be here and excited for this conversation. Pass.
Cool. All righty then. So any thoughts about the proposal that's on the table about having the strategic plan in terms of when it can happen, how it can happen? Greg's provided a bit of an outline. Any thoughts or recommendations around that outline? That's a lot of questions, but I'll take a response to any of them.
Daniel Stack.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I know everybody agrees that, you know, once hopefully this gets to the point where like what the Constitution and should entail, the process should be really public. But I think also in the process of creating a strategic plan, I think it should be different than normal strategic plan processes. I think there should be opportunities early on for people to comment and actually shape that process too, just to model democracy. And I think that could be done via, you know, just polls online, if there are a certain set of decisions that have to be made, but trying to get as many people involved and interested as in the idea as early as possible. And also I had a very random idea that I just want to put out there, and maybe people will think it's crazy and come back to it in a couple of years, but there are people who have declared themselves sovereign states across the country. Mr. Show did a pretty good parody of it on their show in like 1996 or something like that. But just as like an action that sort of really sort of exemplifies the entire process, really just going somewhere, pretending to annex land like in a public park or something. This land is now whatever, you know, not Portlandia or something like that. But then coming up on the spot with a constitution, like here in the United States, you know, all of these drugs are legal. In this country, everything's legal. But like just sort of creating an action along those lines that could show people how sort of ludicrous our Constitution is and how different a new Constitution would be if we created it right now. I think it's a very random idea, but it could be interesting if it was explored in the right way.
Thanks, Daniel. I could almost see a street theater event on that, or in front of some library or something. Could be very cool. And you
Margaret's
got
back.
a heart from Shelley. Go ahead, Margaret.
So, oh, darn, I lost the screen again. On, I think I know what Daniel's referring to about the sovereign states with land issues, but just as a caution, the state of Jefferson in Northern California, Southern Oregon, has a long and pretty right-wing history. And there's also something, I know that the sheriff of Mendocino, or the former sheriff of Mendocino County, was involved in a group that called themselves Sovereign Sheriffs. And they were really right-wing and had their part of their sovereignty was they didn't have to enforce the laws of the United States if they didn't agree with them. But I also have, there's a group in Butte County, Chico, that's about land use, and it's mostly Native American led, I think, from what little I've seen of it, which is more about, I think, what Daniel's talking about. So would it just be clear that there's more than, there's various people using that term sovereign. The other thing that just, there's a guy in Humboldt, I think he's still alive, Ray Rafael, who used to teach at Humboldt State and is a historian, and his area of expertise is the Revolution and the early United States and the late colonial period. And he taught a course at one time of it through Ollie, the Osher Lifelong Learning, on writing a constitution. So I can check, I can just Google him and check and see if he has any written stuff about the process of writing a constitution. So I'll assign myself that little task.
That's very cool. This is the kind of conversation that we would have if we were doing some strategic planning. And the part of my brain that categorizes things, and listening to Margaret, if we were in a room doing strategic planning, you identified who could be allies or alliances for the work, who can fertilize it, who can help it grow, and then who might be toxic or impediments to the work, who might want to poison it or kill it. And that piece, not for us to put too much energy in, what might be an obstacle to this, but to go in without being clear about what is it we have to inoculate around this work? How do we need to protect our information? How do we need to make sure our gatherings are secure of people who are, I don't have the right word for it because I would cuss. But that's the kind of conversation, a strategic conversation, that needs to go into our overall map plan. I imagine some kind of architecture thing, but I want to underscore that we nail, we pinpoint these moments and these pieces for that strategic conversation, and we should have it sooner than later. Greg unmuted,
Greg?
so I take it that means you got something to say, Greg.
Well, just to say that I think the first step is to plan our plan.
Right.
And, these examples that have been brought up, excellent examples. What Margaret has said, looking at Ray Raphael, I think he's the guy who wrote the People's History of the American Revolution. That would fall under like research of, many sorts of things, under what I put down, polling and what's out there. And what Daniel suggested in one way, shape, or form would fall under sort of an example of, at the very end, an alternative. So while we're trying to develop a large alternative people's constitution, we're trying to do a constitution, whether that's sovereignty in the way that Daniel suggested, or, the pitfalls and concerns that Margaret raised. So all of these are examples of sort of the plan, but I think the first step is to plan what our plan is going to be.
Howdy, Jason, you want to check in?
Can't hear
Okay.
you.
You unmuted,
didn't-
gave us a thumbs up. Is that it? That's fine. So any reactions to the need that we need to plan the plan? I
Yep.
think that's an ASAP
Agree.
thing. I see
Key
some
on staff.
nods. Anybody think we need to barrel forward without jumping into that plan? And I
Anybody hear me?
don't mean barrel is a bad thing.
Yeah, Keon, we hear you.
Oh, word. Yeah, definitely +1, the need to plan the plan. That should be like first and foremost of just going that out. And then also like to George's point and others' point around like security culture, I think is really key for us to be thinking about, given how, we know the level of co-optation that comes within the existing power structures, and anything that we put out there is almost certain to be co-opted almost immediately. Which is why it'll be key, I think, to have the given that grassroots organizing still like the one-on-one peer interactions are still like the most effective means of like bringing people into into spaces. I think we're going to have to it's going to require us to continue doing that. And one of the things that I learned from George Floyd was just the George Floyd protest, it's like just being ready with a robust security culture, and really, being intentional on how we use technology, especially to like engage in those one-on-one interactions. It's obvious that we're like everything that we do like via a computer is like almost certainly like surveilled or can be like accessed, for most part. But a lot of us fly under the radar, and it also is no excuse to like make it easy for those powers that be to get access to that. So especially those of us, that like aren't as technologically savvy, like connecting with those of us that are to like, best prepare and understand like how vulnerable our communications are, and just like being cognizant of what we put out publicly as well as privately is going to be, I think that's kind of one of the steps in our planning as we plan the plan to reach out and build the movement. And there are plenty of other resources that I've have access to like help us kind of do both digital hygiene around things, as well as just, thinking about how we go about our security culture.
Thanks,
Jenny
Keon.
Stack.
That was awesome. Was that? Say again?
Jenny.
Jenny,
Jenny Stack.
sorry, Jenny.
No worries. So on this discussion and starting right now, just as we get started, should I just do the information we're gathering and not do names like I'm doing regular minutes here? And just start in that vein?
I would
Yeah.
not recommend that you do regular minutes because that's
Okay.
just too much. But, capturing the spirit of the conversation, any key points and decisions, I think is the
Okay.
cool thing to do.
Will do.
Yep.
And if I was in the same room, I'd be doing snaps for what you said, Keon. And I want to tell y'all briefly. I'm pretty sure that last time I talked, I told y'all about being at the Southern Movement Assembly in Bricks, North Carolina, organized by Project South, mostly younger, groovy people. I was one of the elders. It was kick-ass. If I didn't tell you all about it, we'll have to do it another time because, I don't want to use a lot of time. But there were maybe 150, 200, mostly people of color, younger, nobody, the average age may have been 37. And there were not more than a dozen people who were my age or older, maybe less than a dozen. And it was just all we would want to have it was awesome. We created these synthesized notes, which I would love to share with y'all because they're awesome. But, and all about exactly what we're talking about, not in terms of the Constitution itself, but what happens after, like creating an alternative system to everything, since we can't depend on the state. Y'all, to be in a gathering and hearing somebody say out loud, since we can't depend on the state to provide any safety for us, what are we gonna do? So let's come up with XYZ. I could have been floating, it was awesome. So Saturday, we're outside at this place that was a former plantation. And I learned when I was there that not just regular plantation, But this is where they took the runaway slaves who had gotten caught and they reprogrammed them. Fucking scary. Okay. So we're outside, we're having this session, and that's when someone else talked about how many military bases there are around the world and how crazy that is. And the connection between keeping people of color communities drugged, whether it's tons of, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, opiates, it's about keeping people. It was just awesome hearing other people say stuff I think all the time. And then the sheriff's car pulls up and 4 people, 3 guys and a person whose gender I can't say, okay, remember exactly, get up and walk to talk to the sheriff. And one of the facilitators said, it's fine, everybody, we got this covered. They had a security team, Keon, and it was all good. The fucking sheriff left. It was a beautiful thing. It really was. I'm glad to live long enough to see things that need to happen come into place. I'm glad to be some small part of it. And so when are we going to do this planning the plan? And after when, how? Any ideas when?
So
Or how long you think it would take, Greg? Are we, my proposal would be a 4 to 6 hour meeting. It sounds horrible, but I can't imagine getting anything done in less than 4. And if we have 6, we got time to screw things up and get it right again. Fix it. It's my thought.
Keon Stack.
Go ahead, Keon.
Yeah.
Millie Stack?
Yeah, I'd say, having spending a 4 to 6 hour time block to just focus on strategic planning around this, in particular, this plan, and identifying our key dates, creating the timeline, and figuring out the deadlines to meet those timelines. So the benchmarks for each of that. Yeah, I'd say I think it can be done over the course of a weekend if we're just like we do with or we have done with the retreat. I've done it virtually before. Not as fun, but is what we is what it is with a lot of things. And there are ways in which we can be fairly secure. There's this program called Jitsi, if you aren't familiar with it, that supposedly is a more encrypted version of Zoom, although not as user friendly as for everybody, but it does allow you to at least it doesn't require a download, which is the beneficial thing. But yeah, I think setting a block of time that we work on just strategic planning, identify our key dates and times, and then the deadlines of what needs to be done before that.
Okay, thanks.
Millie Stack? Okay, so I'm sorry again, I missed the beginning of the call. I don't know if this was covered, but we finally identified a programs proposal for 2023 for our Move to Amend Education Fund, which is under DU, as we all know. And in that we included and prioritized an in-person national retreat. We also proposed the idea that be combined somehow with a People's Movement Assembly. But again, I think the conversations and next steps within this, I would think really would be better in person for security reasons and, for inspiration. But I think that's possible to set up, for the beginning of the year. And again, we are, basing our request on funding to include that pass.
Stack. Millie, what was the location conversation that we were talking about? Were we still considering Florida?
Well, I can't speak for Jenny, and Jenny, it's an offering from her friend, but the Pensacola had come up as a location that is possible if we could get, the housing covered. I don't know if you want to speak with that, but wherever it would be, I mean, we can work it out where that would be strategic. And maybe it doesn't include the PMA. But what I'm saying is this conversation about, creating a plan, a strategic plan for this seems like something to happen in person and taking advantage of that moment.
Yeah, and the reason that I asked the location is because Daniel's in the chat. You probably can't see asking location, and I wanted him to know.
Oh yeah, convenient for you and your fam.
Yeah. And also, yeah, so I think I don't think doing a PMA is a bad thing to consider if, folks who are in the area can like do that local work, but setting aside a full day of that retreat to do that planning, I agree, is the most secure and probably the most, juicy way to do it too.
Okay, that sounds good. Do you think
Jenny
people? Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
It seems like a good time to just have this a quick talk about it. I have a friend there who has a big, beautiful home, and she should be done restoring it by the first of the year. And she has offered it to move to him for free for a strategic retreat. And it's absolutely lovely. And of course, I told her, maybe like an in-kind donation so that she can get a tax rebate on it or something like that. But that is a possibility.
Sounds wonderful.
Daniel Stack.
Daniel.
I'm curious if Jenny has any thoughts around being able to get together in Pensacola, like get organizers and activists together, because I'm sort of skeptical on that point. I wasn't doing any organizing when I lived there, but things were fairly unorganized. Well, one, I would love to hear Jenny's opinion, but like alternately also there are a couple places that are not that far away. If people were open to perhaps doing a retreat in Pensacola and maybe doing a PMA in New Orleans. Pass.
Jenny, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they have some dedicated folks. I think New Orleans would make more sense for a PMA. I did person PMA, but I haven't done any organizing there. So, but yeah, I think Louisiana, New Orleans, it's only 3 hours away too.
All right. So January, possibly getting together. Thinking back on our last conversation, which I feel for me felt like a initial conversation on this piece of work around the People's Constitution. Was there any activity or action we needed to do before February to move the work on towards the People's Constitution?
Stack.
Jessica Stack.
Yes, there was Greg and Jessica, but Jessica, I heard you first.
I was just going to say that maybe we could continue with the homework that is already being done in terms of thinking about risks and allies, I guess would be a way to put it. And then also like maybe there's just some like mapping of things that could be done beforehand. Stuff like that, just sort of lay of the land stuff that might help us get a better big picture of the layout of the next 6 years, as far as we could see. Pass.
That's absolutely true. We can absolutely identify, alliances, allies, and obstacles or threats or who's in the way. Greg.
Yeah, I was going to say much the same thing. There's a lot of material and information we can collect and bring to that gathering, so we're just not starting, from zero at that point. Other than having an agenda, I don't think just simply coming in with an agenda is enough. The more we can do prep-wise, the more effective and efficient that time will be, which even, a day or two is just going to be kind of the bare bones start.
Yes. So do you think y'all would be in a position to and willing and able to come to the retreat a day early? I don't really want to propose staying a day late because I think that we would be spent by the end. I don't think a day at the beginning is going to drain too much. Yes, Millie.
I mean, I think that can also come as we are crafting the agenda and how that flow of that time is. We do definitely, if we're going to include a public event, we need a good chunk of time from everybody, 4 days. There's no way to get what we need in 5 days. Staff maybe come sooner. I don't know. But to think that maybe the flow of that is definitely determined by the agenda also of that retreat, and could be, finagled at a later time when we have more of a time idea to pass.
Okay, so we need to finesse the timing, but it would take more time. That's what I wanted to underscore. That it would mean at least an additional day with added to the retreat time itself, and maybe more if we're doing an event. Okay. Any other priority thoughts related to this? So
Greg.
go ahead, Greg.
I have concerns about doing a public event. I just think it's too much, and it places our minds away from the big picture stuff. And maybe I'm in the minority on that big time, but I just have I don't think my brain could handle that.
Shelley Stack.
Go ahead, Shelley, and then Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with that. I feel like planning a retreat in and of itself is a pretty heavy lift, and adding that to it, and especially in an entirely new community where we don't have a lot of connections. I am seeing in the chat Margaret bringing up, the geographical reality that most of us are here on this side. We've always done things here, though. There's a good argument for us doing things in other places at some point soon. But I'm also looking at Jessica's situation. My first retreat, I had a 3-month-old, and I wouldn't have been able to, I think y'all maybe could figure it out if we were, in the general region. But yeah, pretty precluding circumstances for travel. So I don't know. All these are important considerations. I don't have a strong opinion, but I just want to make sure that's named to pass.
They are super important considerations. We got Jessica and then Millie.
I just, I really agree with Greg. Actually, I think for me, that's just two very different states of mind, like planning a PMA and doing a strategic event where we're thinking about a new constitution. So I would add my voice to that one. Also, I have another call at 1 o'clock, so I'll have to jump soon, but I think it would be helpful to have regular meetings until then to just check in on the homework and make sure things are moving, and that we're building lists and stuff like that. So that's my 2 cents. Pass.
Very good. Millie.
Yeah, definitely hear what everyone's saying, and in course of, coming up with the idea, it is to utilize the resources of, if we're going to travel, if we're going to move everybody to an in-person location, it is a huge lift, and so taking advantage of that, if we are going to, do it in a new place. And maybe it doesn't look like a PMA. Maybe, Greg, when you came back, we had our last retreat in the Bay Area. You did a small meeting with organizers, and maybe it can be just, a smaller touching base with local organizers or something, to, solidify that. And maybe that could, not include everybody. But just, sort of being mindful of if we gather everyone, it would be nice to like best utilize, that space, time, brain, also hearing it can't be too much. And it doesn't maybe need to include everyone, and could certainly take a form less, labor intensive than a public PMA. Pass.
Very good. Keon, I see you, but I want to share stuff before Jessica goes and before I forget. And I do have, and some of them are moved to amend, contacts in the Gulf and in New Orleans area. So we could have a gathering where, even if it's just us trying to connect more to people in that region, because we don't have a lot of contacts or affiliates in that part of the world. So that may be worthwhile. The other thing is, I definitely think it would be too soon for a PMA. My reasoning, the strategic reasoning I have, is that we haven't gotten everything set. And I'm including our defense, our political defense. Because once we come out, then the demons come after us. And I want us to be ready and primed and like jump. I don't want it to be a race to who, gets their Article 5 convention first. I want it to be, we got this, back the fuck off. And we're not ready to do that yet. So until we're ready to do that, I think we keep it under wraps as much as we can. Keon.
Yeah, you basically said what I was thinking, which is like, I think we should take our time. There's no rush to get this out publicly, especially given just the level of uncertainty going into this next year. I mean, November we'll have a more clear picture of like where things may ultimately be at. And yeah, agree with Daniel, like the biggest pushback that we can expect from is going to be from Democrats,
Right.
In particular. So I think I like Daniel's suggestion of like, thinking on starting in California, or at least on the West Coast in general, because I think that's kind of where a lot of our analysis tends to like, be based off of, like, that's where our strongest base tends to be. So, and I think we should take our time. I hate to be a broken record. It's like slow is smooth and smooth is fast, in my opinion. And I think we should be very cognizant of the sense of urgency that we go into this moment, and recognizing that, we have ideas, but they are not necessarily shared where everybody shared by everybody, and that we have to meet people where they're at too, which includes our most likely allies and partners.
That's right. Cool.
Daniel.
Cool.
Jenny,
Daniel. And then Jenny.
What was I going to say? I was going to suggest, well, I was also going to just say that if Jenny's friend's house was utilized later in the year, it is significantly cheaper, at least for me, and I assume for a lot of other folks, to fly into New Orleans and just drive to Pensacola. And so in the context of anything that might happen in the future, people might be flying back home out of New Orleans anyway. But also, I just wanted to add what I feel like a lot of people have said during the Black Freedom Movement, that, if you want to make real change in this country, you have to organize the South. And I think, that's still true, because that's where all of the vestiges of slavery and the strongest, elements of capitalism are still operative. I think it is fairly interesting to think about New Orleans as a place to possibly target in the future, but in the future after 6 to 9 months of organizing, because I know some organizers in New Orleans too, and just some friends who live there. But I think if we went, we would want people to actually come in like a way in which they're not just like, who are these motherfuckers who don't live here who are coming here to tell us how to do some shit. But New Orleans is like, it's one of the poorest places in the country. It's like Detroit or Baltimore if you're Black. And you know, it's also one of the biggest tourist destinations in the country and the world. It's really like a case study in capitalism, and there is a lot of good organizing going on there, but there's a whole lot of good old boy capitalist racist slavery power.
Yep.
It's an interesting city to be in and just talk about. Pass.
A lot of corruption too. So maybe we can follow Poor People's Campaign model in that when we're ready, we launch in many places at once so that people see examples of what can be done, and you can't go back. We can talk about that another time in terms of that formula Poor People's Campaign has for just keep pushing the line. So it's 3:58 or 1:58 or whatever. Is there anything that's
Jenny
pressing
Stack.
we need to? Hey, Jenny, I'm sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to weigh in on a couple of things. Yeah, New Orleans is a very unique and interesting place. And I do have friends who are organizing down there, and I know organizers. I've just never personally, done any actions there. I'm not sure about the house later on. She's in the process of remodeling, and there's a little bit of a window. And I want to point out that Greg's on the East Coast, Alfonso's in Texas. The new person we're looking to hire will be in Pennsylvania. George is in North Carolina. Yoni is in South Florida. So we're not just, I'm not talking about maybe the PMA having that in California might make sense, or New Orleans. I just wanted to throw those things in there. And I'm enjoying the conversation.
Cool. So when do we meet next? In a couple of weeks? Is that too soon? In a month?
How often are we, have we even set a typical meeting cadence? If not, maybe that's.
I don't think we have, but as Jessica said before she peeled, and she's right, we should continue meeting, working on the homework, developing what's going to feed our strategic plan. Anybody have a suggestion?
I thought someone via email had suggested like regularly either this time or opposite Mondays, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just making things up. But if this works for people, we could possibly do this. A suggestion. First Thursday of the month. Or
Is that what
yeah.
this is? Okay.
Mhm.
So on the first Thursday in November, let me go see what that is.
Yep.
I'm a little slow. Just give me a minute.
Should be able to do first Thursday.
Okay, it's the 3rd, November 3rd. Anybody? Can't do November 3rd, same time.
Actually, I can't. PDP is having its fall retreat during that
Okay.
time, so I'll be busy until 2 p.m. But doesn't necessarily mean I don't think all of us need to be here like for every meeting, but but as long as we keep up with notes, and I think
Okay.
we should have like a quorum of, or majority of folks.
Can other
Stack.
people? Yes,
Stacks. So, we lost Jessica, we don't have but I'm seeing Daniel suggested a doodle, and that might make the most sense. I also feel like the 3rd, I'm just gonna speak for Millie here that Millie's gonna be just arriving at that time.
oh
So
man,
I would like to not maybe have it a meeting heavy week.
maybe the
but,
10th, a week later. And a doodle poll would be fine, but as long as someone besides me does it. You really like doing it, don't you, Shelley?
I freaking hate doing
Stack,
it.
stack, stack.
I was just messing with you. I'm sorry. Go
Earned
ahead,
it.
Stack.
Millie.
Boom.
Millie, I
Okay,
hear
let's
you. Go
see.
ahead.
Let's avoid a doodle if we can. So how about that Thursday, the 10th, and Keon is at 2 p.m. Pacific work for you? And does that work for everybody else if we bump that back to 2 hours?
So,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I could do Thursday the 10th at noon at this time.
Okay, can everybody else do Thursday, the 10th at noon?
Thursday,
Noon.
the 10th. Greg, can you do it?
3 p.m.
Greg Stack. Yeah, that
Jason
works
has
for me,
another
but,
meeting at that time. Greg?
well, that works for me, but I'd like to propose something more in between every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. A month seems to me a long time.
Okay,
That's actually what I was or what I was thinking as well. And I was thinking for the in-between meetings, like those second meetings of the month, whether it would make sense to maybe have it more of like a working meetings where like if there are documents or things for us to like kind of write up and make decisions about, we're working in like shared documents together, like taking time to just like, like 10 or 15 minutes at a time for, just typing in a doc or working things out in the shared document and just speaking up when we have questions and then like reviewing our work going into the first Thursday or whenever of the month where we're then talking about like overall planning and setting next steps for our working meeting, for our next working.
I get that, Keon,
I-
but we've lost people, so making a decision on that would be tough now. Although meeting in 2 weeks on the 20th makes sense. And,
And I got to go. I'm sorry.
okay,
My appointment is.
Same here.
All right, take care.
all right,
Bye now.
happy foot. And if we can identify homework that needs to be done between now and then, we might review it and take the next step on it on that call together. Keon, would you like to facilitate that meeting in 2 weeks on the 20th?
Double checking my schedule and I can facilitate that meeting. Yes.
Sweet.
Yeah, just
right.
please put it on my calendar.
Same time?
Same time,
Should go same time. Yeah.
noon for y'all,
Okay.
3 for other people, maybe. Shelley, do we have enough information, you think, to have a meeting in 2 weeks and whatnot? See you,
Yeah.
Jason,
Can you tell me the details one more time?
the 20th at noon Pacific.
3 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, you want me to just make a
Eastern.
calendar event?
Yes, please.
I'll do that right
And
now.
we don't have a firm agenda, but Jenny, for notes, we want to identify between now and then any items we need to include in the strategic planning process and start on any homework that we can do for that. Identifying lists of like allies or obstacles, opportunities, key dates, anything that can help into the strategic planning process that we'll be doing together. All right, then. I will send the recording to Jenny and Jenny only, unless somebody else wants it. And we will see each other in 2 weeks. All right. Bye, humans.
All right. Thanks, George.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
All
Thanks,
right,
George.
blessings.
Bye.
Thanks,